So in case you are the sort of person who avoids apocalyptic news to focus on becoming a happy and well-adjusted person, last week the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released a report about how stuff's going with the climate. It concluded things like, thanks to a continued rise in global temperatures, we can expect more wildfires, floods, heat waves, and water shortages over the next 30 years. But wait, you might be asking, what if we do good things? Well, they also figured out, even if nations manage to impose the strongest cuts to greenhouse gas emissions, the planet is all but certain to exceed the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement's more ambitious goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And for all our North American friends, not even North American, American friends, that's 2.17 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll read one last quote from an article in the LA Times about this. It is unequivocal that human interference has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And it's extremely likely that emissions from energy and industry were to blame. So it was a very bad report. And to be very frank, the TLDR was like, we're fucked. And that every metric that climate scientists have used to say, if we just get to this point in 10 years or this point in 20 years, we are not on track to make any of those right now, unless there are drastic changes. And there's a lot of response to this on the internet last week. Some good, some apocalyptic, some bad, some victim blamey. But there's one article, we'll link to it in the description, that I saw in the LA Times that to me like encapsulated a lot of maybe what I think is a bad response to this. And it was an article that was like, here's 5 things you can do, you Serby, you Helen, you Maddy, to stop climate change. And there were things like travel less, insulate your home and lower the thermostat, vote, see the big picture, and finally, cut yourself a little slack. Which, always fun. And a meme that was going around this week is, well, I guess an article that's been turned into a meme. I'm sure everyone's seen this. There was a 2017 Guardian article that cited a study that showed that 71% of global emissions were produced by just 100 companies. So a lot of people in response to this news were basically like, hey, everyone, it's literally a bunch of big companies and governments doing this. Let's be mad at them and not blame ourselves. But then I saw a very popular humorist and writer on their social media account. I'm not going to throw them under the bus. This person posted that actually that study is wrong because the real point is that all of these companies produce so much greenhouse gas and emissions because we, Michael, Serby, Helen, and Maddy, want to buy so much stuff so that technically it is our fault because our consumption is driving production. This made me feel a type of way. But I'm curious, and let's start here. Like, I know that you all are well-adjusted humans that didn't make yourself feel terrible by reading the report, but like, in general, what is your response? Like, how do you feel when news like this comes out and we all spend a week feeling apocalyptic?
Terrified. Honestly, this type of news like throws me into a spiral, which is why I have a hard time reading about it. It's the kind of thing that genuinely keeps me up at night and makes me not want to have children, which is what I talked about with Tom in the last episode, where I was like, it's because of all these things that now I don't want to have kids. And I try to do like on a micro level, like I try to do everything I can do to like help, but I always feel like it's not enough. Like anything that I individually do, like I insulate my house, I recycle, I do all these different little things, but I feel like it's never enough and I feel hopeless.
Yeah, we're on the exact same page, actually. I think that was part of the reason I didn't read it, is because I've inundated myself with this stuff for over the last few years, and it's just been, every time I do, it's like you said, Serby, you spiral. Like I'm the same way. Like I'm moping, because it feels like hopeless. It feels like there's nothing you can do, and I like don't want to do anything because it feels like, what's the point? Like, but at the same time, you're grasping for control in other ways. Like, for example, this sounds kind of silly probably, but I would, like when I was traveling between San Francisco and LA back when I was, had a job up in San Francisco, I would take the train back and forth rather than take, rather than fly, because it just made me feel extremely icky. You feel like you have to grasp at something. It's that like fallacy of control, right? And definitely, of course, we all have, should do our part. But the reality is, at least from my perspective, that there's only so much like each individual can do, and that like collective action from like groups of people who aren't involved with making these big decisions around, policy and that kind of thing. Like we just don't have that kind of control. So it just feels devastating. But anyway,
No, it's interesting what you said, because I do think a certain generation has been raised with this like mindset of that this stuff is largely our fault and comes down to individual decisions. Like I remember as a kid, I used to watch Nickelodeon a lot. Shouts to Nickelodeon. But Nickelodeon did a thing called The Big Help, and it was sort of like a community service and environmental thing. And I've talked about this before, maybe on this podcast, but there was a song that I heard as like a 6 or 7 year old that was like, something was like, make the planet happy, take a shorter shower, or something like that. And I, for most of my childhood, would take showers with this terror of like, if I do not get the soap out of my hair or whatever soon, I'm going to kill the planet. Like it's going to be on me. And I do think like, especially when I was younger, I really took a lot of that on. And I think now sometimes it feels like two things are happening. One, that we fall into blaming ourselves because it makes us feel less helpless, right? Because if we tell ourselves, if I just do X, Y, and Z, we can make things better, which in a weird sense, that guilt feels better than I have no control over the fate of a planet and ecosystem that sustains human life, and I might not be able to fix it. That's real fucking scary. And on the flip side, that narrative plays right into like, ExxonMobil being able to make ads that are like, we're doing everything we can to care for sea animals. ExxonMobil, we're here for you. And it's like, no, like you're just then putting shit on us. Or like when BP sponsors some like community service project, people volunteer. So I think with a lot of like the rhetoric in the past week, I don't know. It seems like there's these two poles that are scary. Like one is this total defeatism, like we're completely fucked, who cares? And the other is like this kind of like Protestant moralism of it is up to all of us individually to be good little boys and girls so that God will save the planet. I understand them from a psychological level that we're just trying to cope, but they just feel unsatisfying.
It feels like everything, like all of the rhetoric around climate change right now is one big cope. I want to come back to something you said though, Michael, about, the idea of us being the ones who drive the demand. The way that things have been perceived socially was that your value was intrinsically linked to consumption and to like, that's where your worth is about. And until we shift our values as a society, I think, which sounds absurd and kind of grandiose, but like until we move away from seeing value as it and having that, intrinsically linked with stuff and having that message be put out to us, not only from the people around us, but from, companies from the time that we're born, obviously, because that's what they do. They sell stuff. I think that that's not going to go away.
It's that vibe of like, no one wanted to drink Coca-Cola until we were told we needed to drink Coca-Cola. Like no one needed to have their smartphone 24/7 until an object was designed to have an addictive and desire-based thing. So I do think I was very annoyed last week by some of the like, it's on us. It's not the company's fault. It's us. And the companies only do it because we do it. Like, well, but the point is to get back to like the train thing. Well, why do we all need cars? Because we don't have adequate public transportation that allows us to go places. I know we've all been different places. I know Serbies spent a lot of time in Europe and stuff like that. Like you go to a lot of other cities in a lot of other countries and you don't need a car there because they just have a public transportation system, many of which run on green energy that allow you to do that. So in that case, like, sure, you could say if you live in like London or Amsterdam or whatever, maybe you are an asshole if you have a car and you don't need to, because you don't need to have it. But if you live in most sprawling American cities, like, what are you going to do? Live in Houston and not have a car? Or move to Denver or LA or whatever. So that's not, I don't know. It's just like, that's not on us that we don't have an infrastructure that makes it possible for us to do that. Sorry, I'm ranting.
It's a very car-centric culture, especially, in these big cities like Los Angeles, for example, duh, like how the fuck are you going to get across the city if you don't have a car? I mean, we have the bus system, but like it's poorly maintained from my experience. And it's not, it's difficult to be able to get to do things efficiently, which again is required by the society that we live in, to have to, we have to be at shit on time. It's easy to say, okay, we should just get rid of cars, right? But then it's like, all right, but there's a lot of people who have to commute from like hours outside of the city to come into work. They have to, their jobs are here. They have to be able to live. And so, the burden of these things so often falls on people who don't have any other options. Yeah,
Makes
I
sense.
just think there's something frustrating about that.
So I think that other countries I feel like they take a better approach to this sort of thing. Like the Netherlands, for example, I'm I don't know the exact years and things like that, but they said that only electric cars will be able to be sold after, say, 2026 or whatever the year is. And after that year, you're not allowed to have any other car unless it's like electric. So there are a lot of Teslas and things like that, but they're challenging all of these companies to come up with new technology to adopt green tech in order to save the planet in that way. And I think that's a great way of doing it, to just ban something and put the burden on these companies to rise to the challenge, especially if that technology is available. So I was really happy to hear about that, and I would like to see more of those sorts of things.
So you might know this, you might not. In the early part of the 20th century, the city of Los Angeles had one of the largest public transit systems in the country. You could get from, Pasadena to Venice Beach with one change or whatever. And for anyone who's not from this area, it's like a long way. And today that would be like an hour and a half in the car in traffic. So it's like, well, why did this major city, the second largest city in the US, have this massive public transit system in like the 1930s and now it sucks? Well, because the gas companies and a bunch of other conglomerates lobbied the government to get everything ripped up to build highways on this promise of the freedom that cars would give. It was a massive marketing and lobbying campaign in which a city destroyed their public transportation system. And by many metrics, public transit in the city of Los Angeles was better like 100 years ago than it is now, which is insane because 100 years ago, I'm just going to assume 100 years ago you could die of herpes. I don't know if that's true. I'm just going to say it. A lot of things have happened. A lot of them involve the confluence of like government and private interests that have created a system of dependence on cars and fuel. And because those problems weren't created by like our individual decisions, sadly, they're not going to be fixed in that way, in my humble opinion. And that's, I think, the scary thing with all of this, the structural aspect.